Okay, record keeping. Juicy.
Juicy. Yeah.
I think
Uh,
first thing I'm wondering about is like, client load, downtime, like when you do it, um, and how you, because there's like the progress notes and process notes. Progress notes, I feel like that's sort of synonymous with the like record keeping. Is
mhm.
that true? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, that's the one. You are legally required to keep progress notes. Process notes are optional.
And so if you're like subpoenaed for records, they're asking to see your progress notes. And those,
Yeah, it didn't go that enough into it. Like I want to know because process notes really appeal to me.
yes.
I want to understand, like, I think it said anything you write down could get subpoenaed. I think it's just like would be another layer that they would have to ask, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the progress notes, I think kind of there's something about it that feels annoying to me. Because it serves the function of like, I mean, okay, on one hand, the benefit of it is like you're keeping track like weekly, what's going on with the client, like they're presenting issue, like how are they doing, like and just kind of keeping track. Like I get that for like the continuity, but also just its use for like proving to insurance, I think is where I'm like kind of annoyed, or um just like the mandated like legality of it, where I mean you read some of the examples and it's just so clinical and like one dimensional, like client was mentally alert today, they are relatively stable, fee was $70, check, like
Mhm.
that is odd to me. But like yeah, the process notes I feel like is where you would actually be considering, the person that you're seeing, like their life story, their history, their experience, and like really conceptualizing and connecting with what's going on. And I think, yeah, feel free to interrupt me too. But yeah, it's weird where it's like, oh, progress notes, those are the ones that, could get seen if they're required by law. In the process notes, those are yours to kind of have your own process with. Um, but also they could be seen too. So I'm like, well, which one? What is it?
Yeah, and I had curiosity about the process notes. Like, okay, if those aren't legally required, presumably then the those like time limits on how long you have to keep records don't apply. So maybe you could get rid of them more frequently so that like you get to use them to process, but like you don't carry them as long, so there's less risk of stuff getting seen. Um, but I feel like everything that we're learning in like every other class goes into process notes. And then progress notes to me, I don't know, I'm imagining like at this point, there has to be software that's basically like if you're using some kind of software to schedule appointments,
Mhm.
that must plug into something that just like auto populates like the client's name, the date, the fee, how long it was, like basically everything. And then there's very few things that change session to session. Like, okay, client was alert. Fine. I have to fill that in, I guess. Um, but yeah, so to me, I imagine that that has to exist, and that makes me feel like resigned, but like not, it doesn't feel as much like a burden
Mhm.
um, to just kind of click through almost as like a slight add-on to checking my calendar and scheduling stuff and just like that doesn't take a lot of memory or time. Um, and I feel really clear that I would want to keep both and keep them separate and therefore like put as little as possible into the progress notes.
Mhm.
And so yeah, but I also share this question of when do you do it and how do you balance your time, especially if you are putting more time into like process notes.
Mhm.
Um, and I keep wondering this because yeah, I don't like I haven't seen a psychoanalyst, so
Mhm.
I think they like take notes and stuff at during a session, but everyone I've seen is like present with me in a session, and I like that, and that's my plan as a therapist. But then I'm like, how do I how do I make sure I remember everything? And do I write it down like in that tiny window between clients? That feels totally frantic.
Mhm.
So yeah, that part I don't really understand.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like hung up on um the need to do it, and yeah, some of it can just be sort of like checking a box. And I know that there is software. We sort of talked about it in one of my classes. I'm sure there's multiple. Dr. Wong had showed it in our psychodynamic class. Um, but that just feels like, dotting I's, crossing T's, and feels like a different sort of energy or like orientation to how I'm gonna be thinking about a person. And like I will want there to feel like there's like spaciousness, to not only just like remember like the details of a person's story, but to like kind of honor, the person. And so I don't know, I'm feeling just this conflict of um that's just coming up with the legality or the I don't know, the certain things. But yeah, 10 minutes in between. I mean, I guess it depends on, if you're at a clinic or if you're private practice. And, I personally don't think that I hear some people have like 20, 30 clients. I don't think I'm wired for that. I I don't know how I'm gonna set up my life, to support myself and to have like a caseload that feels like manageable. Um, but I do feel like I would need space. I don't know if it would be like setting like one day a week or like 2 afternoons, like maybe like a Tuesday, Thursday afternoon where I catch up on like the days in between or something. To do. I also liked your idea of like keeping them separate. I almost feel like now I'm like making it more complicated, like have like the progress notes of the like check mark, check boxes, and then like the process notes, but then even like a secret third option that's like also sort of process notey that's not that's maybe a little more esoteric than like clinical, because I'm thinking about when in my psychodynamic class we were writing like psychodynamic formulations, which felt more process notey in a way where you're really like kind of thinking about um their issues that they're coming in and the different areas of life that are connected, and then the different time periods, what they've been going through, and then how that leads you to understanding, this person and how that's informing your treatment plan. Like where does treatment plan fall in on these like records? Like,
That, yeah, right. Part that has to get touched on in the progress notes, but
mhm,
presumably for clinicians who are so inclined, you're not going to want to put like tons of details.
right. Yeah. I think I'm just like, how do I do this? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. And I wasn't in that class, and so we didn't do psychodynamic formulations. Um, but I was, as you were describing that, like getting a vision of like, okay, yeah, have like a journal or something that's sort of like just mine. And then I have questions of, is that even legal? Like what are you legally allowed to write down about a client? Like, are there laws about that? I assume you can't like just jot something on a napkin and leave it somewhere.
Yeah.
Uh, that breaks confidentiality. So yeah, I'm curious like
Yeah.
about the parameters of that. But yeah, I really, it does feel really important to be able to have something that's more informal, that's really like to support you be the best clinician for this person and
Mhm.
not,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm also just I'm at the like in between age. I think we're like the same age, but I like pen and paper, and it's just like so much is digital, and I like am, kicking and screaming at like trying to adapt to doing everything. But I feel like I could see myself having a journal or maybe like a notebook for each client or something that after a session I write down like mom did this at 7, like just so I can remember, a detail that felt significant, even if I don't have time to like maybe there's like a few things after a session that I do in that break in between, but is not at all any sort of formal or clear thing that I would present to someone, but just to like, yeah, have my own process to jog my own memory when I come back, you know. My one of my professor for my community mental health class that I'm in this summer, um she does everything pen and paper. So she's like, I've got my filing cabinet. I keep everything for
Wow.
7 years, and if I get called, I've got my file. I'm just like, okay, so you that is an option too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like your notebook thing, and I'm even imagining I feel very technologically inclined, I think just from my like the world that I grew up in, and like being in tech. But at the same time, I feel like internally split. Like I always wrote my essays by hand before typing them. And so I feel like stuff that's like human, I do pen and paper, and stuff that's like machine or like logic, I do on a computer. So in my head, I was like, oh, maybe the process notes are in a notebook and the progress notes are this automated thing that I'm imagining.
Yeah.
Um, which somehow also feels like easier in a court situation. Like if you get subpoenaed, it's just like, oh, boop, here's the thing. And it's so separate that like maybe it doesn't even occur to ask for process notes.
Right. Yeah, I'm curious, like what situations would they want process notes, which feels like a related but maybe separate question. Because if it's like chicken scratch,
Mhm. Right. Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. And okay, this is probably getting into like not exactly this topic, but just looking at the example progress notes, and thinking about insurance, like I know if people are using their insurance, you need a diagnosis code.
Right.
And so like, I don't know, just thinking about that and how like, yeah, every session has to be forward progress in some way that they're going to evaluate as like, yes, we're moving forward. And there's like an assumption of linearity there that makes no sense to me. I don't know if that's exactly related to the question, but
Yeah.
yeah, I am thinking about like that way. I would have to put some thought into like, okay, what can I pull from what happened today that I can say is linear progress from where
Mhm.
we were?
Yeah. No, you're touching on something that I'm like curious about too, because like, yeah, I do feel pretty opposed to pathologizing, and I put off taking the psych assessment class because I'm just like, I don't think I'm ready for that. So I know at some point I'll be grappling with it more, but I think there is a way to be like depathologizing as a therapist and navigate insurance. Like my therapist back home, um, actually I don't want to like get into that here, but was very like methodical in how we would approach what I'm assuming were her like progress notes of like, okay, these are what we need to do. This is what I'm thinking for insurance. And like I was involved in, you know, some of like in all of those decisions. So she did a really good job there. But then like, yeah, that also just feels like it still is just pandering to this like stratifying, pathologizing system that yeah is in conflict with values that I have, but also in needing to navigate the system if someone needs like insurance or for their insurance to cover their yeah, this is opening up like a whole kind of open other field. But if you're putting certain things in progress notes that are by the book, accommodate, you know, what you have to do, you know, using like the DSM code or whatever, it just feels like it misses out on like the wholeness of a person, which I think for confidentiality and it's like good to keep that private, but then also, yeah, I guess it would just suck in a situation where it's like being legally reviewed and it's just so one-dimensional. Um, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I at one point took a leave of absence from my job and I had to get like progress notes from my therapist to like be evaluated by this committee that was just periodically like, okay, are you allowed to be on leave still? Are you allowed to be on leave still? And I was like, yeah, there's so much about it that I'm like, this is really stressful, which is totally counterproductive.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so the therapist would like go over, this is like, are you okay with me putting these things? This is what I'm thinking of putting for this session. And but yeah, like then this committee of people who were just like hired, like they're not trained, would look it over. And then there were times where I had to talk to them because they were like, you know, evaluating in a way that didn't agree. And yeah, so it's just like, I don't know. It's really frustrating to have to play in that system.
Yeah. It's making me like this class, I feel like it's just bringing a lot into my awareness of like, I don't know, the word just like interfacing. I think you maybe used that a few weeks ago. Someone used it recently. I was like, yes, we're interfacing in like all these different arenas and like therapists wear a lot more hats than I think maybe I realized.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, same.
do you feel complete on this so far for now?
For the purposes of this video, yes.